vendors who think the key to kind of winning in the channel is just signing up tons of partners and the business will come. That's never the answer.
Alex Smith leads channels and ecosystems research at the Futurum Group and has spent 2 decades studying how partner models have evolved across enterprise tech.
The technology landscape just got more and more complex, and the role that different partners play is a whole myriad of things, and trying to make sense of that is difficult for partner leaders. Increasingly, the expectation is more around things like, are they bringing their own IP and software to the table? Are they bringing their own industry expertise to the table? Are they bringing their own advisory services?
If you are building a partner strategy, leading ecosystems, or rethinking how partnerships drive growth, this is a conversation you can't afford to miss. Welcome to the Investable Partnerships podcast. Today's marketplaces are led by a marketplace strategy that dominates how technology organizations go to market and bring an economic return for their shareholders. Fundamentally, within these go-to-market strategies there's a huge effort, there's a lot of uneven outcomes, and there's also a lot of participation by both sides of the equation. In today's episode, we're going to look at why partner-led growth is something that is dominating the way technology organizations go to market, and what are the challenges that these technology organizations have around a go-to-market strategy that is there to deliver a good economic return. Today, I'm joined by Alex Smith from Futurum Group. Alex, welcome to the Investable Partnerships podcast show.
Oh, thank you. And actually, I should say welcome to you to flying all the way out to Portland just to speak with me. It's quite the honor.
No, I appreciate it. It's been a bit of a holiday in the US 10 days prior, and now we're here to work. But really appreciate the time that you are taking to spend with us and our audience on the Investable Partnerships podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to talk partnerships, and especially with you, Des.
Excellent. So let's start there. You head the channels and ecosystems research at Futurum Group. Give our audience a little bit of an understanding about your background, how you got to where you are today, and then we'll talk a bit about the perspectives around partnerships and ecosystems that you see from over 20 years in this particular space as well.
Yeah, I'm about 2 decades in the tech industry, but really that entire time, landed in the industry as an analyst. And so my job was to cover different technology sectors, write about the trends, constantly speaking with tech executives and understanding, their strategies, and just keep following how the industry is evolving. And mostly been in enterprise tech, so looking at areas such as cybersecurity, networking, infrastructure, software, and probably about 10 to 15 years ago, really shifted to focus on channels and go-to-market strategies. And I did that for my last firm, and then joined Futurum about just over a year ago to help lead our efforts here, looking into the ecosystem and partnership space. And I think what I love about that side of research is you get to be technology agnostic, right? If you are a tech company that wants to land in enterprise and commercial and government, like, you need a partner ecosystem in some capacity. And so I like being able to, kind of dance around the tech industry and understand how different companies are working with the partner sphere to land in in their customer base.
Yeah. And I suppose, 20 years is a long time. It's like 20 years is a lifetime in a lot of industries.
Yeah.
And there's been so much change in the technology space, in how organizations drive value for shareholders, how we partner for a way in which we can extend our reach, extend our customer acquisition, reduce our costs internally. Early on in your career, what surprised you about how partners actually create value within the ecosystem?
So when I landed in the industry, again, nearly 20 years ago, if we cast our minds back then, really tech was heavily dominated by, it was a hardware centric market, right? We were still that was in the midst of client server and PCs being, still one of the big drivers of the industry. And even when it came to software, it was largely on premise, right? The selling model behind software was some form of licensing, which is in effect, a tangible thing that can be sold to an extent. So when you look at the value of partners, a lot of it was built around reselling, right? We talk about channel, and channel implies a very linear one direction model from vendor through partner to customer. And it was all about reselling. It was about kind of the value add and attach around that. But reselling was fundamentally the kind of core value proposition that a lot of partners brought to the table. And in some respects, it was a very well understood industry, very clear KPIs, clear programs for engaging with such partners, and a very good business model for a lot of partners, and actually still is. But certainly when we cast back 20 years ago, that was very much the kind of the ethos and the kind of core of how I would say the partner community was looked at.
Yeah, and how they created value. So where do you see the misconception is from looking back from there to now in actually how partners actually create value? Like, what did you see is there a misconception in how we think from an inside vendor, inside distributor, looking out to partners, how they create value?
I just think the world has gotten a lot more complex, and the technology landscape has gotten a lot more complex. I don't think we can ignore the fundamental shift of moving from kind of on-premise environments and the role that cloud has played in just kind of changing the economics and the distribution models of technology and the consumption models of technology. And in that period, there was, and there still is, but certainly in kind of the midst of the 2010s, you're seeing lots more product-led growth motions arise. You're seeing just the explosion of SaaS companies in the landscape. And I think it's fair to say that the role of partners during kind of a period there was potentially being questioned. I mean, obviously it still is, I think, but certainly, you saw a lot of that. But then just as I come back to it, the technology landscape just got more and more complex. And so the ability to integrate technology, to understand how to get the most value out of your deployments, how to manage a technology environment that was both on-premise but also running in the cloud. Then, of course, you inject kind of remote and workers everywhere. And so if I kind of compare to, nearly 20 years ago, where I'm just going to say the world was a lot simpler from a technology side of things. The partnering discipline was a bit more simpler. Yeah. Now it's highly complex, and the role that different partners play is a whole myriad of things. And trying to make sense of that is difficult for partner leaders.
Yeah, and I would say that shift in the technology space, client server, web, cloud, and AI. AI not as in a different thing, but cloud as sort of at the end of cloud there, we've seen a massive shift in the go-to-market models. Mm-hmm. And if we look at those go-to-market models, there's still a lot of assumptions that partner leaders have actually made about where they should be placing their bets, which partners that they should be working with. So what are some of those assumptions that have changed for you over the time from those early days to now around the go-to-market shift?
I think the assumptions are interesting because they vary depending on who you're talking with inside the organization, right? One of the interesting pain points that I've seen is when you're kind of talking with partner leaders, they kind of have two challenges. They have the internal stakeholder challenge and many respect managing up, right? How they manage up to their C-suite, their sales, or even right up to the CEO. And then, of course, they have, their external stakeholders, the actual partners, how are they vying for mind share, et cetera. Going back to the assumptions question, there are definitely companies out there who or sorry, I should say leaders out there whose assumptions are that partners play fulfillment role, right? They're not bringing anything additional to the equation aside from fulfilling business that company is driving, or the demand that company is driving themselves. And in many respects, I think that's a fair assumption. That is happening for a lot of partners and a lot of activity out there. I would just go as far to say is fulfillment is a value add, right? Fulfillment, it requires lots of resources, both in terms of just, managing the actual sale, fielding questions, some of that support. And if you can parse some of that activity off to a partner, that has value. Now, it might not be the value that a C-level exec wants who's striving for growth, but it is value, and it should be paid for accordingly. Yeah. But I think one that should be recognized. I think the assumption that on the flip side of that, there are always questions of, is this partner actually doing enough to drive incremental growth for me?
Yeah.
And I think that is a fair question that should be had in the industry, but also, fundamentally need to understand the dynamics of a specific partner and what their own objectives are and what their own goals are. They are their own business, right? They might have goals that slightly misalign with yours. And I always say, if you are an early stage company that is thinking, I need to engage with partners to help drive net new demand, I think oftentimes the experience is not going to live up there. It's still incumbent upon in my belief, a company to prove their own value in the market, to demonstrate to customers that they have a strong value proposition, and partners will kind of come on that journey.
Yeah.
But if you can't do it yourself, then how do you expect a partner to do that for you?
Yeah, how do you expect? And do you see there are vendors that actually struggle to do that today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are vendors who think that the key to kind of winning in the channel is just signing up tons of partners, right?
Yeah.
And the business will come. I mean, whatever kind of go to market you're looking at, that's never the answer. It's never a spray and pray approach. It's not about signing lots of partners. It's not about just, listing on marketplaces.
Yeah.
It's not about just hiring a bunch of sellers, right? You have to meet capacity with kind of a clear target objective and the right amount of enablement and support to kind of execute your goals. So it's never as easy as just kind of scaling up, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm interested to get your point of view on these, particularly from a go-to-market. Where do you see marketplaces and ecosystems create more pressure than clarity?
Yeah. I mean, marketplaces is a fascinating kind of injection into the world of go-to-market. Definitely spent a lot of my recent kind of time studying and looking at, marketplaces. And I think there we've also seen an interesting kind of evolution. I remember when marketplaces were first kind of coming on the scene, and I'll tell you actually a specific debate I had with an exec at Red Hat.
Yeah.
Must have been about 6-7 years ago. And, this individual was saying, no, marketplaces are just going to become an increasingly more efficient way for enterprises to identify, procure, and deploy software. I was a bit more, well, no, I think software is still going to be very much like a people-driven, engagement and selling motion.
Yeah.
Kind of turns out we were both right. Right. And, like in anything in life, you kind of meet somewhere in the middle where, again, going back 6 years ago, a lot of the talk around marketplaces was an alternate route to partners. What we ended up seeing was marketplaces being an and play to partners.
Yep.
And as the economics of, the listing fees of a lot of the major hyperscaler marketplaces started to come down, they're now operating at a margin level that's similar to what you might see from traditional distribution. And so it makes it a more cost-effective route to market. And it means there's more room in the margin stack for a partner to also be involved in that deal as well.
Yeah.
And what that's then allows for is a more digital-oriented backend for kind of managing, deploying, and sourcing and billing the technology, but at the front end, having a partner to provide that, additional services and support and, just the people, right, to be at the front end of that deal. So I certainly think over the past 3-4 years, we've seen partners and marketplaces become an and play, but we're still very early in this cycle, and they're constantly working with ISVs who are still trying to figure out how to best activate a marketplace and partner strategy.
And partner strategy at the exact same time. Yeah. Very, very complex environment to work within, particularly when you've got billions of dollars now being represented by pure marketplace transactions from some of the largest vendors in the AWS ecosystem as well. I'm interested to see from your research vantage point is, what do you see partners are being asked of today that wasn't really expected of them before?
I think the easy answer to kind of land on is it's always, if I kind of put it in a generic bucket, it's value add services. In some respects, that's unfair because partners have always been asked to do value add services. But I just think the what is the value add services has changed as the just the landscape has evolved, right? And so increasingly, the expectation of what is encapsulated in value add services is more around things like, are they bringing their own IP and software to the table? Are they bringing their own vertical or industry expertise to the table? Are they bringing their own, again, advisory services where they are, beyond just kind of coming to the table with like billable hours for, break fix and support, but actually are they able to help design and architect a technology strategy and implement it? So that expectation, I think, is continually expected and asked for. And I think there is this kind of meeting in the middle of, I think at one end of the spectrum, if you have the very box shift resell model of, we're on margin of, selling from product from point A to point B. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have the GSIs who are, have lived and breathed professional advisory services, since their entire history. In the middle is where it gets mushy. And in the middle, it's where that kind of blend of technology and services is kind of still, finding its like, what is that definition? What does that partner look like? And it's a whole myriad of companies in there.
It's less about, I suppose the struggle is less about intent and more about actually how are you measuring success of the partner there.
Yeah.
And when you look at it from a ecosystem point of view, there's a lot of talk about this. I know other research firms have been talking a lot about how partners are measured, how partners are incentivized, how partners are actually identified within that mushy muddle. There's no clear at the top, there's no clear at the bottom. There's this mushy muddle. So why do you think partner ecosystems still really heavily rely on activity-based signals like certifications, participation in events, and tiers? Why do you think they still rely heavily on that to try and predict capability or try and predict where success will come from? Because they really seem like such weak economic signals of success.
Maybe, but I might almost argue that with the advent of AI and the ability to, kind of capture more and more data points and make sense out of them in kind of, more of an intelligent way, I actually think the trick is, can you capture more data points and build a more holistic story from all these signals, right? I kind of agree that individually, attending a training event, that's individually, it's not much of a signal. And sometimes, and oftentimes, it's just a very perfunctory thing that, partners are expected to do. But I think if you blended that with, oh, okay, this partner has attended a lot of these types of training events. They have done a lot of deal registrations in this particular area. They have downloaded a lot of marketing materials in this sector. If you kind of have that holistic view of all these activities and can kind of formulate a more accurate picture of, oh, this partner, based on all these signals, is really strong in this area. I don't know. I think we could be at the cusp of unlocking way more intelligence and way more kind of ability to kind of really profile partners based on, where their real strengths are. And so, yes, individually these signals are kind of weak, but combined together, I think they could be strong. And one other thing I would also say, I also think there's been kind of maybe a bit of a fallacy or misconception. When I speak to program leaders, there's definitely been a wondering of, how do we evolve our partner program to not be revenue based, right? A lot of traditional channel programs are, you sell X amount and you move up a tier and so on and so forth. And while I agree that there are more, as we kind of just said, there's more signals that I think that are worth tracking and monitoring, you can't divorce it from the actual impact to top line, especially if you want to continue to justify investments internally
in there as well.
Yeah. And so some of the best program initiatives that I've seen of late is where they are able to connect some of these more pre-sales, advisory, kind of customer interaction activities through to close one, right? Yeah. And even if it, close one is a different partner or happening at a different cycle, et cetera, being able to connect activities that are happening in January, February, March to a deal that closes in, November, October, December, and being able to connect that to, in some capacity to these partners, I think that's essential for a program leader. And if they don't have that, they're going to forever have that, internal upwards battle. What are my partners doing for us?
Yeah. Almost here to, I wonder if every leader step back and instead of looking, or if they step back and instead of looking at the activity that generated that sale, they looked at the partners through a investment or portfolio lens. I wonder what the outcome might be. I wonder how that outcome might be different to be more consistent about looking at these activities that are leading indicators. They're leading indicators to this partner fits this type of investment or this type of portfolio that we want to go to market with, versus it's the activity of they downloaded the event in a box and they ran an event. So therefore, capability-wise, marketing, they must be great at marketing and we should be investing money in them.
Yeah. Maybe. I mean, I think that, but whatever kind of theories might be had, at the end of the day, you have to be able to kind of track it and monitor it. And you can have all kinds of theories, but, if you're not able to kind of pull out the data to try to showcase, the answers to those theories, then they're still just, kind of going to remain theories. And
I love the way you've brought that together around bringing different data sources, bringing them together and trying to understand what decisions can be made around the collection of those activities and not just looking at them individually. I think that's what a high-performing ecosystem should be doing differently today.
Yeah.
So if I'm a partnership and ecosystem leader and I'm listening to this podcast and our session, I want to ask you a few things here. So what are 1 to 3 actions leaders can do to reduce the noise of the signal that they're getting from what their partner program's telling them versus actually what's happening?
I think we have to accept that a partner leader sits, somewhere in the middle of their organization hierarchy. And step one is to understand what is their top-down, objectives from C-suite, right? You can't build a partner program that is, hey, looks like my favorite program that I've seen out in the industry if it doesn't kind of match the internal realities and objectives of what your own kind of suite is kind of dictating to the table. So that's the first thing I would say is, mapping your own program and strategy to your internal objectives, not best in class program.
Yeah. Don't take the copy and paste and go, well, this is best in class.
Yeah. Thinking of, from an infrastructure side of things, what data do you have and what gaps do you also have? And, trying to work in around that. I don't think it's about kind of collecting data for data's sake. That can be, you can kind of get just lost in the weeds there, but certainly understanding what your kind of inputs are and how you can leverage that to kind of, again, evangelize internally.
One mindset shift that you think a partner leader needs to make today?
Mindset shift, I would say a lot of my messages are going to be about internal management, actually.
Yeah.
I think a lot of partners, if they come to the table thinking partners, I think that's in on paper the right thing to do. But if you don't have the internal, if you don't have internal alignment, then you're going to have far more problems.
Yeah, it's almost the always on button of selling and promoting partner value.
Yeah.
It's that, just because you've got partners and you've got a partner program, don't assume that internally that everyone understands partner value.
Yeah.
So shift from that being more proactive around where are you finding, you've got to be finding multiple intersection points across leaders, across the organization, sales, marketing, product leadership, to make sure that partner value is being intrinsically top of mind.
If you don't have internal buy-in, you're alone out there in the water.
Earlier on, we spoke about this volume mode of partners. So, what is a common mistake that keeps ecosystem leaders stuck in that volume mode? What would you say is one mistake?
I think one mistake might be, thinking the grass is always greener, right?
There's always someone better.
Seeing a bigger partner, a big, I need to get into. Anytime you ask like, oh, who are your strategic partners? And, you're going to get a lot of the same names sometimes. And the reality is a lot of these companies there's only so much mind share that they have. So I think it is always a tough conundrum between trying to break into, net new partner that might unlock, net new versus how much more can I extract out of my existing partner. So that's a tough one to kind of, have a generic kind of answer to, but I think that's always a key decision point that the partner leaders need to face.
Yeah, it's, all these points really just point to there's a bigger shift happening than we actually realize in terms of what needs to be done to make partnerships and ecosystems really sit front and center of a core lever for the CEO to get behind as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, customers is like, how much are you looking for net new versus how much are you looking to expand within your kind of existing customer base? And what is that kind of, what does the opportunity look like? And it's the same kind of equation with partners. And many times over the years, there's always just been this kind of insatiable kind of search for, who is the partner out there that is just absolutely crushing it and I'm not doing business with them, and how do I find them? And that partner may exist, but they may not. And there's plenty of I'm sure every partner leader can look within their current ecosystem and say there's more that we can do within here.
So if we recorded this podcast in 2 years' time again, and hopefully we don't do it only in 2 years' time again, what would be different about how successful ecosystems operate?
Well, hopefully in 2 years, in 2 years' time, we will. We're going to go through another round of. We've touched a little bit on AI, but obviously we're still the early cycles there, and just how that is transforming. Really everything, business models and partner models. And I think in 2 years' time, we will see the proliferation of marketplaces really kind of expand more into more kind of agentic commerce work streams, where there is going to be more digital buying that is happening, between buyer and seller, which again will re-challenge the role that kind of reselling has in a lot of parts of the partner economy. But I think the more optimistic side of that is that we will see a evolving breed of partner that is just very agentic first in the way in which they operate, the way in which they're kind of deploying technology and tools. And I think in the same way that we saw a new breed of born in the cloud partner as cloud came onto the scene, I expect we will see a new breed of what actually we're calling frontier partners who will land in the industry with these very agentic workflows and agentic mindsets. And that's going to be a whole new breed of company that vendors are going to have to think, how do I engage with this kind of partner? How do I, leverage them in my ecosystem go-to-market model?
Love it. Love it. Okay, we're near the end, and the end is the fun part in my podcast. We call this the Partnerships Fast Five.
Okay.
So there's 5 quick statements that I'm going to give you, and I'm looking for 1 to 2 words, answers, just what comes to mind. There's no right or wrong answer. You won't be judged, but there is a gong that does go out at the end of the year for the best ones. Just kidding. Okay. Just kidding. Okay, so let's go. One belief about partnerships you've changed your mind on in the last 6 months.
I believe that there will be a new breed of partner.
New breed of partner, which is this frontier partner that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a new breed, or there will be a new breed.
There will be a new breed.
There will be a new breed. Okay. One capability partners must build next to be successful in an ecosystem.
Agentic operating models.
One metric partner leaders must care about more today.
I'm going to say customer activity generically.
One mistake you see reported way too often about how partner leaders go to market.
Changing programs constantly.
That's why this industry is so crazy, isn't it? And last one piece of advice for new ecosystem leaders that are joining this crazy world of technology, partnerships, and ecosystem.
Give me a call.
Give Futurum a call. I love that. I
got to get one plug in, right?
Yeah, you've got to. Absolutely. Alex, thanks very much for joining me and our listeners and putting some language around these challenges that partner leaders and ecosystem leaders really do struggle to articulate today. So it's been so good to have you here, and thank you very much for welcoming me to Portland as well.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thanks for having me on.
Great. If this episode resonated with you, share it today with a partner leader, people in sales, marketing, operations. Doesn't matter if you're helping partners grow, this episode should be worthwhile for you. Thank you very much.